I'm James Siniak, and I'm your Libertarian candidate for the U.S. Senate race. Welcome to Wednesday Night Town Hall. We do these town halls online every week at 7:30. Most of them will be live, although a few will be pre-recorded. This one's live, and I look forward to the comments and questions that you may have in addressing the U.S. Senate race. We have some very important messages today, but this last week we gained a lot of followers on social media, so I also wanted to take a moment to present my campaign and what it exactly means to me to bring a libertarian solution to Washington, D.C. So if you haven't followed, this last week has been very busy, and Todd Young voted against our constitutional rights with the Second Amendment red flag laws. In addition to that, Tom McDermott both challenged the First and Second Amendment. I am the only candidate in this race that will defend your constitutional rights at all costs. A little bit about me, I'm a behavior therapist, so I work with kids with autism. And part of working with kids with autism, you realize how important it is to make change that allows them to become more independent. So this is incremental steps to allowing them to have the independence that will benefit them in the long run. I believe that our society in Washington, D.C. has put such a grasp on us that we no longer have that independence. We no longer have that freedom. And I'm here to say we can make incremental changes to allow us to become more free, more independent, and allow for more innovation and more opportunities so that we will have a brighter and more successful future here in America. But we have to fight the stale and wasteful policies of Washington. We have to fight Todd Young and how he's spending worse than Bernie Sanders, and he's not afraid to admit it because he doesn't represent Hoosier voters. And on the Democrat side, how they're going to attack your First Amendment rights if you don't agree with their political agenda, as well, that's specifically Tom McDermott and Hammond. So again, look for a rational candidate that is on your ballot and ready to defend your rights at all costs. I also want to welcome Chris Groff tonight. He produces my town halls. He will help with all the questions. In addition, we have a great feature that most people don't utilize, but you are more than welcome to utilize. We would love for you to actually go live with us. So if you have a question that you want to present live, go ahead and put live in the comments, and we will bring you up on the live stream. Chris, how are we doing tonight?
Doing pretty good. Busy weekend, not nearly as busy as yours, but
tell us a little bit about it. You actually had two events in Hendricks County. You're the chair, for those who don't know, in Hendricks County, and you guys are doing amazing things over there. I attended both events, but give us a little bit of details about that.
So we were at Ribfest and our Pride picnic here on Saturday and Sunday. So it was a lot of moving parts for us, but we got it going. We talked to a bunch of people, and they all seemed to kind of bring the same message to the table when they come to talk to us. And it was that they hated Todd Young, and that's why they approached our booth. And then they got to talk to us a little bit, and we had a lot of really good conversations with people, which I find is huge. Just, being able to sit down and talk to somebody, even if you do have different political differences, let's talk.
Well, and something awesome that you utilize that I've seen other libertarians across the state utilize, and I think it's a great tool, but it's called the world's smallest political quiz. And tell us the crazy part about this. So on Sunday, we get through halfway through the event, and you already ran out of the paper copies of this.
Yeah, we were
completely go to using the QR code. But the thing about this quiz is it's an awesome way to introduce the libertarian idea that our political spectrum isn't just a right-left spectrum, like many people like to make it out. And even the media really likes to shine the light on the loudest voices on the right and the loudest voices on the left. But there's a whole entire diagram that shows that many people are freedom-leaning and want freedom in their individual lives, whether that be on social issues, such as I want the government to stay out of my bedroom. I want the government to stay out of cannabis. I want the government to secure my rights to marry who I want to marry. So on the social side, it shows the freedom-leaning minded individuals on that. And then on the economic side, it shows how when we depend too much on Washington, D.C. to take care of us, how they will restrict our freedoms with that obligation. It's a great quiz. If you haven't taken it, go to, is it World's Smallest Political Quiz, or is it? Or the advocates.org?
Yeah, it's theadvocates.org. I did have the banner scrolling there for a minute for anyone that saw it. You can look that up there. It really is a great quiz, and a lot of people, they came up to the booth and they were just like, well, I already know where I'm going to land. And I was like, cool, where do you think you're going to land? And they would show, oh, I'm 100% Republican. Cool. Well, why don't you take it? Let's see if you do land there. And shockingly, we didn't have, I think we had 100, and it was actually to the left. But, it just showed, and that was the nice thing, was being able to show people like we're not as divided as the media wants us to believe that we are. We agree on a lot of things and we disagree on a lot of things, and that's okay.
Well, and that's the great thing about even the quiz and the conversation that starts with it. When we scream these narratives of the far left and the far right, we look at ourselves as a divided nation. But the reality is we can come together. We can come to the kitchen table. We can discuss issues that we don't even agree on, but maybe there's a solution that meets us somewhere in the middle. Or maybe, it's just the fact that we need to talk about it and realize that we can be friends despite our differences. That's also the part of my race that I really want to implement is that that politicians should be public servants, but they also should be focusing on serving you with a heart of compassion and empathy and understanding and really meet the needs of the public. So this is something that I believe our politicians have lost, that they want to continue to divide us as people. And what happens when we get divided? Uh, I will tell you exactly what happens. When we get divided on issues, the government will increase its power over your everyday decisions because they use those disagreements to further the power of the government and ultimately restricting your rights and your freedoms. I mean, we see this with free speech all the time. The one side will claim they're about free speech until the other side says something they don't like. But our constitutional rights are for everybody. And this is part of the libertarian philosophy. It doesn't matter if you agree with me. You have the right to say what you want to say. And that's how we make change in society, through debate and through logical thinking and hearing people out and not censoring, not showing favoritism to certain groups with freedom of speech. So this is all important topics that Washington will tell you that you need to be divided on. And I'm saying, let's come to the table and discuss these issues.
And I think the other important thing to add on top of that is, when you're coming to the table and we're talking about things, chances are, yeah, we might get in a heated debate, but, we don't have to result in calling people names. We don't have to resort in violence or anything like that. Like, we can have an adult conversation because that's how things get done. You got to have an adult conversation. And yeah, maybe I don't like what you say.
Chris,
And
what's an adult conversation in politics? Have we even seen that in recent times?
I have more adult conversations with my 2-year-old.
I don't see adult conversations happening in politics. And again,
Right. And
that's
then,
something I want to bring to the table. Someone asked me today, why are you going to the Democratic town halls? We've been to 13 town halls across Indiana. They've been great opportunities to meet people in rural Indiana, to meet people in Fishers, Indiana. It's been amazing opportunities all the way down in Evansville. But they're like, why are you going with the Democrats? Why are you doing this? Well, one, the Democrats made it bipartisan. So thank you. Thank you for actually allowing voices to come to the table with solutions. And secondly, if we're going to get anything done in Washington, we have to have conversations with those who disagree with us. That's just how it is.
absolutely. And, and I tell my kids the same thing, and I believe it goes for anyone, even though we don't agree on something, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. And honestly, it was actually someone that was running under the Democratic ticket. I talked to her for probably about an hour this weekend about things. And we came to disagreement on a lot of things, but she said something that really stuck with me that I liked, which was, if we always agree on everything, one of us is wrong.
And that's true.
Like, disagreements, like, you're not going to see another side unless somebody disagrees with you. And then, you know what? Maybe their disagreement's right. And maybe I just never saw it that way. And it's okay. Well, now we can kind of adjust to that, and let's find that solution that's going to work for the people, not for me.
And that's what politicians should be about, finding those solutions. A lot of times I see people campaigning on simple rhetoric, and some of it's not even bad rhetoric. For example, I hear a lot that we need more women in politics. I agree 100%, but that's also just simply saying that isn't an actual solution. So again, I would love to see more women in politics, but we can't just depend on good rhetoric to come up with solutions. Just as a reminder to our viewers, this is a open town hall forum online. So go ahead, submit your questions, and I would love to take those. Chris, what's next on the agenda?
Well, we were talking about coming to solutions, and I feel like one of our hot button issues right now probably pertains more towards medical freedom because a lot of people are not liking what's going on with those rights being taken away.
Absolutely. I've been running on politicians are not physicians, and this means a lot of different things. But the Dobbs versus Jackson case is what everybody's discussing currently, and that's with the Supreme Court case that overturned Roe versus Wade. But the idea is that I wanted to present solutions within this topic, and I hear a lot of heated rhetoric, and rightfully so. A lot of people have very emotional reactions to this. It's an important issue to them, whether you're on the pro-life side or the pro-choice side. I will say up front, I'm socially pro-life. And what I believe that means is we look at solutions to reduce abortion, such as supporting adoption, making adoption essentially free for Americans, supporting our foster care system, reducing our economic strife. So what I mean by that is giving opportunities for those within economic areas that we need to develop and encourage, give more of their tax money back to them so that they have more economic opportunities. And these are the things that we ultimately will reduce abortion with. But on the flip side of that, I don't think that Washington can make medical decisions for individuals. Politicians have overstepped, and we saw that not just with Dobbs, but we are seeing that even through COVID and how Todd Young specifically voted to mandate vaccines for certain individuals. So this is something that Washington will not step back on. They want to control your medical decisions, which should be very scary for you. Think about your future generations and them being forced to take whatever medication or whatever agenda Washington wants to push. And the fact is no matter what medical decision we make, that comes with very serious side effects. Ultimately, we usually use our physicians as guidelines and say, is this going to benefit me more than it'll harm me? And often it does. That's why we take the medication. But those are individual choices that are very educated. And our politicians really need to take a step back and realize that this is our rights to our own medical care.
Absolutely. And Josh, I do see your question down there, but I promise you we are going to get to it, but I'm going to save that for our next segment. But to tap back on that, I talked to a lot of people during the events about one of the questions on the world's smallest political quiz is about privatizing healthcare, which I feel like does kind of touch into this a little bit. And a lot of people are scared of that. They say it wouldn't work because everybody out there is out to make a buck and they're not going to do what's best for the people. Well, an example of what they've done with overturning Roe v. Wade and the rights they're taking away, there are multiple companies that have come out and have stated that, hey, we will cover expenses for any of our employees to go where they can safely get the reproductive care that they need if it is illegal in their state. And that right there shows that, maybe there is something that I'm not seeing. I'm not a big business person. I mean, I don't run a huge corporation, so I don't know what all goes into that. Maybe there is an upside for them, but at the end of the day, they are protecting that right that you deserve. And I feel like that's a way that it can work for us. And that shows an example of, maybe that's a solution. I don't know.
I mean, we have to look at all the counter solutions, and privatizing Medicare sounds very scary. I approach this issue as an incremental step, and we've talked about how I think that we need to take incremental changes. And it's not pulling the plug immediately on everybody on Medicare. That's not what I'm about. But it is saying, hey, look, Medicare for everybody isn't going to work because we've seen how the Washington handles these issues. We see that Social Security right now is a huge issue that I currently am not even going to get retirement for. And ultimately, we just keep kicking that can down the road, and eventually it's going to fall on a future generation, whether that be my nieces or my nieces' children. And it's going to come to a very real crash. So we have to look at these solutions now. And to me, it's not expanding that care, it's looking for alternatives. And I think, as Chris was pointing out, corporations have started to look at ways to better care for their employees, to give them more medical choices, we can see if this is a solution and look at how that works as we talk about it in politics. But it's something that's a very real conversation because we know that currently the solutions that are being given to us by Washington is really putting a burden on future generations and the opportunities that they have.
Absolutely. And, it all always circles back for me to we got to have adult conversations. We have to find that solution that works best for the people, not restrict what they can do. But yeah, I feel like we could go on and on about this, though. I mean, this is a topic that, a lot of people are very passionate about. If anybody wants to come in and talk about it, please let us know, and I will happily bring you in. But
maybe a little bit more happy than me. I've talked a lot about this issue, and it's a great, or I shouldn't say it's a great issue. It's a very emotional issue that needs to be addressed. But
right.
It's important, and I understand why people are really currently it's on their mind, and it's an important topic to discuss. But also an important topic to discuss is Todd Young's record on spending.
Well, before you jump into Todd Young's record on spending, we got a pretty good question here from Courtney Hill.
Okay, let's go with this.
So we got, in my understanding, your opinion that your social religious beliefs shouldn't drive legislation. How would you respond to another politician saying, if you vote against this, I'll vote on blank for you?
So there's two parts to this question. I do believe that social and religious beliefs, if they counter the freedoms of all individuals, should be very not a part of the political solution. And what I mean by that is that sometimes we want to regulate what we believe rather than use our social influence. And our social influence actually makes a bigger impact. So if I'm going to want to legislate something with an iron fist and just say, look, I'm going to throw everybody in jail for an issue that I don't agree on, that's what we have right now in politics. And that's actually why in America we jail more than any other nation in the world. That's crazy to me. Why is more of our population in jail than any other nation, including China? So we look at that and we know that we're ruling with an iron fist. And I really think that if we want to make real change not in Washington, but if we want to make real change in our society, we have to change hearts and minds, and that's through our influence and not through legislation. So that's the first part of that question. I understand what she's saying about I'll vote X for you if you vote for this. That's something that happens in politics all the time. It's a little bit hard to address with that very general statement. But negotiating is part of the job. And I think that when you look at what you're negotiating, you have to really look at your principles and if it goes against those principles. So I think that's something that I would have to address on every specific issue rather than just simply say, I would never negotiate because that's part of politics. We talked about how we have to discuss issues with both sides to come to some compromise. And that does happen in politics. But the compromise should never affect the freedoms of the individuals that I represent.
I think you about nailed it on the head there. And it is hard to go with well, if you vote on this with me, I'll vote on something for you. It's real enticing, but we're trying to get away from what they're doing currently in politics, and I feel there's a lot of that. They're like, well, I guess I'll give up this one little bit, but then that gives me one vote that I can use at a later date. And that's not how it should be.
Well, and that's Todd Young on the Second Amendment. I can't say why he did it, but he ultimately went against the typical Republican message, and he decided that this was something that he was going to vote for. I don't know if it was one of those compromises where he said, "Look, I'm going to vote for this because I know I can get someone to rub my back over here." I'm not saying it was that, but when I look at this issue, it's hard to wonder if it wasn't that because I can't understand why he'd vote that way on that specific issue.
And going into that, it kind of makes me wonder, why can't we go out and we can't ask Todd Young, why did you vote this way? This isn't what we wanted as Hoosiers. Why?
So if you have been following Todd Young's campaign, this is actually something very interesting. And there's actually two parts to it. I'll address both. But the first part is he's held a very restrictive campaign, and by that I mean it's not accessible to the general public. He doesn't confront Democrats. Every event so far has been a very isolated to my constituent, to my base and only my base, which he represents all Hoosiers. So that should be concerning in the first place. But then if you really paid attention this last week, Rob Kendall went out and tried to record something he was saying. And he said, we're not, well, he actually had a staffer do it because that's what you do when you're an elitist. But his staffer said, we're not recording today. We don't want any of this on record. But look, he's accountable to the public for the job he's doing. You're his boss. Why can't we record his messages? And the flip side of this is it's really actually hypocritical because every single town hall that I've done, and even on my own social media, his guys actually record everything I do, and I'm aware of it. They've actually been trolling on my Facebook, which again, I'm aware of it. But the point is my campaign's accessible. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you don't know where you belong in politics and you're still trying to find your way, because my campaign is about serving you and being accessible to you. Um, Again, Todd Young should be accountable to the people because that's who he works for. And this is a very serious issue that you should be concerned as a voter for. If he's not being accessible, that means that he does not want to be held accountable.
And, my question kind of goes a little this way of why isn't the Republican Party holding him accountable? That goes against what they normally would go against. And I'm pretty sure that I don't want to speak for everyone in the Libertarian Party, but if James goes in and votes for red flag laws, if he was in the Senate chair and he votes against red flag laws, I'm pretty sure most of us are going to be the first people in line going, James, what are you doing here? This is not right.
It shows the mentality that the Republicans believe, and they truly believe this, that they don't earn your vote, they deserve your vote. And this is the mentality that they've built. And it's just a terrible idea because it's not about representing the people. And so when we look at the establishment of the Republican Party, they ran on issues, but they didn't really mean it. All they meant was rhetoric that would get you excited to vote. And that again goes back to my Dobbs statement. I don't want to just put out rhetoric that is easy for me to say, look, and have it be meaningless when I actually get to Washington. Everything I'm putting out is very carefully considered solutions that I'm going to look for in the bills that are presented to me. And that's what politics should be. It shouldn't be this rhetoric that when we actually get elected, we're not going to follow or believe in. And that's very unprincipled and it doesn't serve you well.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to circle back around to Josh's to get us into our second topic that we wanted to speak of. And it's a perfect opening for it. Would you be willing to submit legislation to roll back recent efforts to infringe on gun rights? And then I'll ask the second part after.
Yeah, so simply put, our Constitution stands. Currently, that is our current what should be. And anything that infringes on the Constitution should be rolled back, should be repealed. There are ways to amend the Constitution. And this is something that I don't hear people talk about. If people really want to secure certain rights, or on the opposite side, they're not so sure that some of these should exist in the Constitution, there is actually ways to address those issues. But when it comes to the current Constitution, I believe in what it states, and I believe there's a reason that they put this in. And the reason I believe that they put in the Second Amendment, well, multiple reasons, but the first one I'd like to address is because we created a very unique nation in that our accountability belonged with the people. The people are the power of this nation. They believed that everything Washington does should serve the people. So they gave you the Second Amendment to give you the power. Now, in addition to that, they also knew that a lot of these constitutional rights meant absolutely nothing if you couldn't defend yourself over these constitutional rights. And so your 2A protects your 1A. Use your 1A to voice your concern about your 2A. They go hand in hand. And this is something that our forefathers were very genius about. And I appreciate them for, because I respect their decision to allow us to protect ourselves, not just from someone who could commit victim, someone who could, for example, rape my sister, or somebody who could break into my house. It's not just protection against that. It's protection for our rights.
Absolutely. And that gets into the second part. Do you know of any pre existing 2A policies that you would specifically want to repeal?
Well, I know Indiana did a really good job with their constitutional carry. Um, Ultimately, I'd like to see that across our nation because, again, I believe in our constitutional rights. But at the moment, I can't think of a specific. Um, I mean, there's a lot of ideas that I know, but it's a very broad question, and our government has infringed so much on this issue that we really got to make the incremental change to bring it back. And the reality is that the last 30 years, violence has actually decreased if you look at statistics, with the exception, there is an exception of COVID, and violence did increase during COVID. But this shows me that mental health is important. And during COVID, people were at their lowest points. And I'll say this: healthy people don't commit acts of violence. Healthy people don't murder other individuals. So we really have to focus on that mental health and look at how violence is decreasing and while protecting our rights. And um, yeah, every single one of these uh, red flag laws, whatever one we want to address, is something that infringes on your right.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a step back because we have another question regarding our first topic we spoke on, which is always fun to talk about, but it's what's hot right now. So Destiny asks, what was gained by overturning Roe v. Wade? What are the politicians ultimately trying to do?
So I will state this: I actually believe that Roe versus Wade was a bad decision because here's why. Roe versus Wade, when it was initiated, was the courts trying to legislate from the bench. And the problem with that is that those decisions can be overturned by the court. So the problem is all this should have gone through the legislation in the first place. So what they basically did with this decision was bring it back to the states, and the states will make their laws. But ultimately, those are all going to end up back in the Supreme Court, and we're going to have to decide these things again. But really, it's about keeping your politicians accountable. Everything should be legislated. So since Roe versus Wade was decided, four times the Republicans have held supermajorities, four times the Democrats have held supermajorities. The Democrats refused to secure women's rights with those supermajorities. The Republicans really didn't do much on the pro-life side with those supermajorities. So really, the politicians never intended to do anything with the rhetoric. They just wanted this decision, Roe versus Wade, to speak for itself. So when we repealed Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs case, what it actually did was bring accountability to the politicians on what they ran on, and that's actually a good thing because look, if politicians are making decisions, you can hold them directly accountable. That's our democratic process. So now they're accountable for the words that they're saying, for the rhetoric they're putting out, and we'll see how many follow up with um, the very, again, it's, it's just saying, oh, I'm pro-life without solutions, I'm pro-choice without securing women's rights. That's what they ran on, and they didn't intend to follow up on that. But now I think this is actually, it might sound insane to say this, but in some ways this is a good thing because it now goes back and holds our officials accountable.
Well, and I feel like that leads into another part of your campaign, which is the pro growth side of it, of, growing growing the party within just the state of Indiana here. We're highlighting people that are also trying to come in and do things at a more local level than on the federal level, which is where a lot of this needs to go back to. We need to get similar people into those local positions to help make those choices and make sure that your rights are protected in your home where that power should be.
I'll say this: every single person that you elect, and look at their name on the ballot, look at what they stand for, and make sure that they're standing for your constitutional rights. Because ultimately, we make the most change within our local communities, and then the state has some influence. And really, how it should go is the federal should have very little influence in our lives. It just makes more sense. The federal government shouldn't be making decisions for every single American. That's not how our nation is designed. Um, so really, if you want to make change, look at your local officials, look at your state officials, and let's roll back a little bit on the federal government. Let's hold them accountable, but also realize that the more power we give to the federal government, the more they'll take, and they'll keep decreasing our freedoms. And that's something that I believe our nation was founded on, was freedoms, which gives innovation and opportunities, and we need to uphold and secure those. And right now, Washington is not doing that. Todd Young is not doing that, and he needs to be held accountable.
Absolutely. And Destiny coming in with even some more hard-hitting questions. If education is important in regards to women's health and unborn children, why were the Planned Parenthoods closed?
So I don't know the specific issue she's talking about with them being closed. I do believe education is an important part of how we deal with our society, and especially on the abortion topic. I believe that, um, when we talk about birth control options and safe sex practices, and those are all ways to reduce abortions. Um, that we do need to look at how we educate, especially young Americans, and make sure that they're getting the proper education on these topics. As far as that specific statement at the end, I'm not sure what centers got closed by what decisions. I'm assuming certain states probably decided to cut funding for Planned Parenthood. And without further knowing the exact issue, I can't really comment on that part of it.
But it's something we can look into. Maybe we can figure something out, exactly what happened. I remember when it all happened. I want to say it was a lot more on the local level. I think you were right. They cut a lot of the funding from it, and they kind of relied on that funding for something which I think actually the government funding was a good thing. It gave my wife is very passionate. So talking with her about it, even just a little bit, giving that access to birth control and having someone to talk to about things that are going to tell you it the way that it is. They're not going to give you the speech you get in our public schools that, abstinence is the only way. And, unfortunately, as great as that might sound on paper, we all know it doesn't happen that way. We were all kids once. We know how it is. And not having that education out there to fully understand it is only going to make the problem worse.
I say this about most things. Between education and mental health, we can solve most of the world's issues. If we're truly educating people and truly caring for them, we're going to solve a lot of violence issues. We're going to solve a lot of these issues of abortion because we're going to reduce them naturally. Um, Education and knowledge is power. That's power to the people. The more power you have, um, that will ultimately help our society, and that goes back to the First Amendment, right? We have to have discussions over these issues because we have to have that knowledge.
Absolutely. And I know not wanting to look at things like 4 years ago, I didn't even think twice about politics or anything. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be a part of it. And then once you start actually paying attention on it, I mean, you start actually paying attention to things, and it's like, oh my gosh, why is all of this going on? And that really goes for anything. If it's your job, I work in IT, and if you don't know what you're doing, then you don't read up on something, I'm not going to be able to fix a problem, and then I lose my job. So learning new things is very important in all aspects of life.
Speaking of IT, I'm messing up my mic over here.
I wish you would stop.
But you're right as far as life is a learning process. We have to learn, and some of those just happen through our discussions.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead. I'll go ahead and put out a final call for any questions we have out there. We're hitting right about the mark we like to keep it at because we don't want to take up too much of your evening. And if somebody doesn't stop us, we'll be talking until about midnight.
We would. And that actually happens sometimes on our group chats. But it's important that we understand the issues that are happening and especially what's happening in Washington, D.C. And back to your comment about, 4 years ago, you didn't understand much about politics. But I argue that our politicians actually want us ignorant. They want us to not understand what's going on. And specifically, I hear a lot, well, any R is better than a D. And I really want to challenge this philosophy because I think this is where knowledge is key. Right now, we have a senator that outspins Bernie Sanders. So tell me how the R is better than the D. Not only does he outspin Bernie Sanders, but he's quick with quick judgments to go to war. He has many issues. And in fact, 6 years ago, he didn't even get the required amount of signatures to run for Senate. But yet, because he's an elitist, he was still allowed to run. So there's a lot of issues with Todd Young that is actually worse than Democrats. You talk about election fraud. Well, let's talk about Todd Young not requiring enough signatures. This is serious issues. And the more ignorant they keep you on them, the more they're going to keep you in a philosophy of, well, any R is better than a D. Or on the other side, any D is better than an R. That's old rhetoric, and it keeps you ignorant. Look and educate yourself about politicians that are coming up with real solutions. I argue that I'm the only one that's going to defend your rights. And it's true. I am the only one in this Senate race that will stand by your constitutional rights. So let's create a society that encourages education and doesn't allow our politicians to keep us ignorant about what's going on in Washington, D.C.
So we do have one more question from Josh. What was your favorite moment from the town hall tour you've been doing thus far?
So this was interesting because it happened 2 town halls ago. It was a little bit of a fiery moment. We actually have it on video, but Tom McDermott and I get the question about specifically Young's vote on red flag laws. And he wants me to go first, so I address it as I always do. I'm against red flag laws. I believe in the Constitution. There's a reason we protect ourselves. It's especially good for minority communities because they can protect themselves, including my sister, who's a minority. And I go through that. It's my typical 2A speech. And he gets up there and he goes next and he says, look, I believe your Second Amendment can be restricted just like your First Amendment. And then he goes into a moment where he talks about how we can restrict free speech. And I really got fired up at this moment. And I don't normally do this. And I asked the moderator for a rebuttal. And the moderator was generous and said, you can have a 1-minute rebuttal. And at that moment, I knew I was going to go hard. And I don't typically do this in the town hall setting. But this was a moment that I felt was very important to defend. And I said, look, I'm going to give you an example of someone restricting free speech here in Indiana. And I gave the example from Hammond, Indiana, where Tom McDermott is mayor, how they attacked somebody on the opposing side for their freedom of speech. And it was basically an F Biden flag. So I understand that they didn't want this flag flying close to a park, but it was still on private property. And I said, look, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that you actually had good intentions on this until I saw profanity twice on your campaign profile in the last week. Now who's not protecting the 8-year-olds, the 7-year-olds? You're putting it out there on the web with politics and kids who are very curious about politics. I know at 8 years old, I was actually looking at politicians. I might be unique in that, but I don't believe that it's uncommon for kids to be curious. And I said, look, if we're only going to if we're going to restrict free speech to attack our political opponents, that's when it's wrong. I don't care where you stand. I'm going to defend your right to speak freely. And I don't believe that can be restricted. So that was a really important moment for me on the town hall. I still stand by it. Tom McDermott got upset. He said, wow, I've never been attacked in these town halls. And I did. I wanted to defend your rights right there. And that's what I'm going to do in Washington, D.C., because politicians, both Todd Young and Tom McDermott, want to restrict your 1A and 2A rights, not to mention most of your other rights as well.
Anyone they can get their hands on. So we got a few questions pop in here. I think you answered Tim's question as he was typing it. It sure looks like. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Dino. James, what is your warmongering policies of our government? For example, the Ukraine conflict. What are your thoughts? I worded that weird.
So this is something that came up a while ago when I was still actually running for the convention, and I didn't even have the nomination yet. And I said, look, libertarians have always been a pro peace party. And this is important to me. I think that we have to really look at how we approach this. And one, we can't make a unilateral decision to go to war. We have to look at what the neighboring countries are also looking at. And in addition to that, the president can't make a unilateral decision. We need to really give that right back to Congress. But ultimately, if we are going to go to war, we have to have a clear entry plan, exactly what that means, and a clear exit strategy, which did not happen in our last war, did not happen in Iraq. But I think that even if we had that, we always have to look at war like a glacier. We don't have to steer the Titanic into it and destroy our ship. We can look for solutions of peace that will be on the world around the world, and that's what we first and foremost want to look for is peaceful resolutions.
Very good. All right. Then the next few we got are on upcoming town halls, which I believe, I think we only have 2 left.
Correct. We have 2 more with the Democratic Party. Again, they were very they extended this opportunity for us, which I'm very grateful for. So thank you to the Democrat Party for hosting a bipartisan town hall. That's impressive to me. Again, that's how we make change in politics. But we have 2 more. The tomorrow's is in Zionsville, and then July 6th we have one in Middlebury, Indiana, which I'm excited because it is very near to where I grew up. So those are the 2 that are with the Democrats. I'm open to doing more town hall style events, but if I do, it'll have to be sponsored by libertarian parties. So I'll rely on my county affiliates to look for opportunities to do town halls. But even just simple meet and greets. I have been to over a third of the state, probably more at this point, and my team has been over half the state. So we are looking to get to every single part of this state to present my fresh modern approach so that every Hoosier voter will have the opportunity to hear what my message and my solutions for Washington, D.C. is.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one our final question for everyone still watching. If you do have a question, you want to shoot it to us in a direct message, or you want to go ahead and leave the comment on here, then we'll circle back around to it. We'll answer it directly on the video itself. The last one is, what is your view of the NSA spying policies of using foreign officials and targets to get an end run around to spy on U.S. citizens?
Well, look, I mean, it's even more simple than that. With the Patriot Act, they can spy directly on us. But the point is too much of our privacy is being invaded. I want to protect our privacy. That is simply not even supporting the Patriot Act. It's a very unpatriotic. And when you look at what it does and invades our privacy, it's important that we really establish what our rights are. And this is something that the NSA doesn't respect. It's something that government has become too large and they don't respect your privacy. So this is something I will fight for in Washington, D.C. And this even includes medical. I have made a statement on this, but this even includes medical privacy. Even with HIPAA laws, I don't think medical privacy goes far enough at the moment. So I will defend privacy at all costs, whether that's medical privacy, whether that's issues with the NSA, or whether that's simply wiretapping fraud. So privacy is an important issue for me.
As it should be. So with that, I'll go ahead and I will turn it back over to you for any closing comments, and we will go ahead and wrap it up.
But definitely, if you like what you heard tonight, definitely consider a fresh modern approach to Washington, D.C., and we can come up with real solutions for Washington. Look for the most viable option on your ballot and stop with that narrative of I have to vote for the lesser of two evils, because I don't believe that's true. Look for someone who's going to serve you with public service, with empathy, with compassion, and an understanding that a heart needs to go back to politics. If you like what you heard tonight, feel free to come back on any Wednesday night at 7:30. We always do these live streams, and I appreciate the comments that come in, because this is a conversation that involves you and how I'm going to represent you. Again, every Wednesday night at 7:30, Chris has been producing these, so I thank him and I thank my team for all the hard work that they have put in this past week. In addition to that, if you like what you're hearing, consider donating at www.ceniac4senate.com/donate. My campaign is funded for the people, by the people. And ultimately, I don't take big corporate money. And even if it was offered to me, I really want my campaign funded by you because that's who I represent. And we're working very hard to have accountability within that money. Fiscal sanity is an important message, not just for Washington, D.C., but for how we run our campaign. So again, consider donating at www.ceniac4senate.com. That's SCENIAK And you can find out much more information on my policies there. You can find out events that I will be at. Again, we're trying to hit all of Indiana because it's important for me to represent all of Hoosiers. Thank you again for tuning in tonight. Thanks, Chris, and everybody have a great Wednesday night.